Good evening, everyone. Okay, and it looks like we are live. It looks like we're live, and we're here to review for AP European History for the semester exam. Okay, so let's go ahead and looks like we've already got some questions in from Fiveable subscribers. Okay, so excellent, excellent. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching here on YouTube, okay, if you're watching here on YouTube, this is actually, sorry, this is the AP Euro semester exam review. And this is brought to you by Fiveable. So it is broadcasting on my YouTube channel, but it is a Fiveable event that all of the questions that I'm going to be answering this evening are questions from Fiveable subscribers. So make sure that if you're interested in learning more about Fiveable, go ahead and click the link that's in the description, fiveable.me/sign up. And there is a code that you can use by midnight tonight. You can use the code Tom Ritchie. Just put in my name, no spaces, when you're signing up, and you can get 30% off of your annual subscription. Now, also, whether you want to subscribe to Fiveable or not, stay hydrated, kids. Let me set a good example here. Fiveable is going to be hosting some Kahoot games next week to prepare you for your exams. So if you want to sign up on those, go to fiveable.me/Kahoot. Okay, so make sure to sign up for that. Space is limited to a certain number of students per game. So you want to make sure that you get in on that. Okay, so make sure to check out Fiveable. And of course, this is streaming on my channel. You're more than welcome to watch. And let me just make sure that everything is working on there. And then I'll go ahead and start answering the questions from Fiveable members. Let's just make sure that this is streaming. Okay, excellent. So we've got the semester exam review streaming right now. Okay, so thank y'all so much for tuning in, and thank you, Emily, for all of these questions. Okay, so Fiveable members, remember that if you're here in the Fiveable chat, you can ask questions. You can also upvote questions. So you let me know out of all of these questions that Emily has put up. Emily, you are the best. I tell you what, my heart is so warm right now seeing all these questions. And with that, let me go ahead and start answering. But remember, if you are a Fiveable subscriber, if you like these questions, if you have the same question, go ahead and upvote it so that I can see that that question is more important and more people want me to answer that. Kahoot is going to be next week. So make sure if you want to do that, make sure to sign up. And again, the questions that I'm going to be answering tonight are going to be from Fiveable subscribers. Now, if you're just somebody that watches my channel, just stay tuned. Make sure you've got me on notifications because I am planning on going live again as a broadcast on my channel that will be completely public, and I'll be taking questions from anybody who's there. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's go ahead and get this started. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So as far as that goes, in my opinion, who are the most influential thinkers of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment? Okay, that's a lot. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the scientific revolution. And one thing that we want to know, let me go ahead and clear something up about the scientific revolution. There's the approach if you want to get a 3, there's the approach if you want to get a 5. There's, of course, that iconic showdown between Galileo and the church, okay? And a lot of times people just think, okay, well, these scientists, they're challenging the church, okay? But it goes a lot deeper than that. That really, if you want to have a complex understanding of this phenomenon that was the scientific revolution, that it's not just about the church. The church is guarding ancient knowledge, okay? So what Galileo and Copernicus and others were really challenging was not so much the church as much as ancient authorities. And so your ancient authorities, as we start off, there are 3 of them that could come up. That could be useful for you. Now, most people get Aristotle and Ptolemy, or it's a written test, Ptolemy. So as far as that goes, most people are going to get those. A lot of people forget Galen, Galen, Now, Galen was a Roman physician who was really the most influential medical thinker all the way up to the scientific revolution. So it's really a willingness to challenge ancient authorities. So when Galileo climbed atop the Leaning Tower of Pisa and dropped a cannonball and a musket ball at the same time and showed that they fall at the same speed and that their acceleration picks up due to gravity, he was challenging Aristotle. Okay, Aristotle's viewpoint that, well, which seemed pretty logical, right? I mean, if I drop a cannonball and a sponge, the cannonball is going to land first and it's going to fall faster. But Galileo, through empirical methods, was to show that, what Aristotle said about physics, it's not quite up there, okay? That there are some other things about this. So with that, they're challenging those ancient authorities. Now, for remembering Galen, if you're a Star Wars fan, Galen Erso, the scientist who was working on the Death Star, that is the Paul Stewie. I see a Paul Stewie reference. I love that guy. All right. So as far as that goes, gosh, when I saw Paul Stewie, my whole brain just like, psh. All right. But as far as that goes, Galen Erso, the one who designed the Death Star. So remember, the reason they call him Galen, it's kind of like on Harry Potter. Most of those names have some kind of significance. So with that, just as far as that goes, just keep that in mind. And so I would say you start off with Copernicus and Galileo. Okay, so we're going to start off with Copernicus and Galileo. And of course, Copernicus was a priest, and he did all the mathematical calculations. Galileo, with his telescope, proved this stuff empirically. Now, one thing we want to know about Copernicus and Galileo is that they're not really trying to challenge the church, okay? Like, I mean, they're Catholics. They're devout Catholics. Copernicus was a priest. Galileo was a devout Catholic. And so we want to know that. So they're very influential as far as that goes. Now, another, of course, is Isaac Newton, who takes all of what they did and develops that into the law of universal gravitation. And then I would say from there, now William Harvey actually shows up in the concept outline. And William Harvey was a medical innovator. Okay, so when we think about Harvey, he's challenging Galen. So Galen's medicine was based on, if you're sick, your humors are out of whack, and we've got to get your humors back together. And for William Harvey, a lot of things come down to the circulation of the blood. Okay, I'm no doctor or anything like that, so I can't really explain that too much. Now, as far as reasoning, we've got Bacon and Descartes. Okay, so a lot of people in the scientific revolution that were thinking about in those terms. Okay, but of course, Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, really kind of sending the whole message here, the message of skepticism, that we don't take anything as a given, even our own existence. And with the Enlightenment, you'll of course start off with Voltaire, by far the most influential thinker, with his ideas about religious toleration and deism and free speech and all of that kind of stuff. Now, of course, for beyond that, you've got Rousseau, who, of course, his thoughts on the social contract were very influential on the more radical thinkers of the French Revolution. And so as far as that goes, we want to make sure that we've got that. Let's see, what happened to the question that I'm actually answering? Right. Oh, there it is. Okay. So, and then from the Enlightenment, you've got Diderot with the Encyclopedia. Montesquieu, I think, is somebody, if you're talking about anything with politics. And of course, Montesquieu is bringing in this more rational kind of mindset that before the Enlightenment, remember, you've got the whole divine right of kings. Before Locke challenged that, and of course, Hobbes didn't really buy into that either. But Montesquieu is like, okay, how do we put a government together so that it so that it accounts for human nature. That, you think about Adam Smith and Montesquieu, that both of them are thinking in terms of, humans are greedy and jealous, and they like money, they like to get ahead of other people. So how about we design political and economic systems that account for that? And so Adam Smith, with his whole idea of a laissez-faire economy driven by the invisible hand, that people tend to know what's best for them, and you don't need a lot of rules and regulations. And so the Enlightenment is really more about freedom than it is about anything else. And that's really the starting point here, is a starting point of freedom, whether that be in the economy or, with your civil liberties or anything like that. Okay, now as far as that goes, the AP Euro course, and this is a good question because it's a little bit hazy, because of course we've got our 1450 number, that the AP Euro course begins with the Renaissance, but at the same time we also have to have some context for the Middle Ages, because the printing press, like one of the things that students have to understand is the impact of the printing press. And to understand the impact of the printing press, then you've got to know what were things like before the printing press. What did the printing press change? And so as far as that goes, that's something that is important, as far as that goes. Now, also Petrarch. Petrarch lived in the previous century. And so, it starts in 1450 with a couple of caveats. Okay. So I'd think, if you think about Petrarch and the printing press, you got 3 P's there: Petrarch, printing press. And besides that, I don't think there's really much that students would need to know. For example, there's not going to be a question about the 100 Years' War. Okay, so even though a lot of times we'll discuss the 100 Years' War at the beginning of this class, you're not going to see the 100 Years' War on the AP European History exam. So I would say 1450 with a couple of exceptions. Okay, so that would be mine. All right. So as far as that goes, let's see. We've got go on to the next question. Okay, and okay, Florin, what are we talking about here? Can you explain the difference between Adam Smith's natural and market prices? Okay, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. Okay, now as far as what a market price is, what I'm going to go ahead and maybe mention here is, now, what I can tell you is the difference between the market price, which defined by Adam Smith, and maybe I'm not sure what you mean by Adam Smith's natural price, but what this replaces. Okay, so as far as that goes, in the Middle Ages there was this idea of a just price. Okay, so for example, there are some people who tell me that I should charge more for my tutoring. By the way, if any of you are wanting to have somebody, if you want me to drop in on your group sessions, it's not cheap, but I would be more than happy to help you. I do private tutoring, and I don't charge groups any more than I charge individuals. And so some people are like, you could probably get a little more for that tutoring. And I'm like, that may be clear, the market, but at the same time, I feel like I'm compensated well enough. At $60 an hour, I feel like that's a lot. Now, there are people who make more than that tutoring. So from Adam Smith's perspective, it might be that if I charged $75 an hour, then maybe I'd get a few less clients. But if I could get, let's see, so yeah, basically, if I charged $75 an hour, then I would only need, I'm not very good at math, but I would only need about 3/4 as many clients to make the same amount of money. I'm rounding here, I'm estimating, so y'all don't check my math here. So if I charged more, now if I charged $150 an hour, that would be above the market price. People wouldn't pay that, okay? There would be very few people who would pay that, and I'd probably end up with less money. So the idea of a just price is thinking, and that's the Middle Ages, is thinking that, that's fair. Okay, I made some money and the other person didn't get didn't get ripped off and everybody was happy. But the market price doesn't really have, like, remember, the medieval economy is influenced somewhat by Christian principles, whereas Adam Smith is coming from a more secular Enlightenment approach, that when it comes down to it, what is a fair price? Well, what are people willing to pay? And if we're talking about scarcity, that there's only so much of this that can go around, then, that as far as that goes, if there's only so much of that that can go around, then it needs to go to the people who are going to pay the most for it. This is one thing that, I've gotten in a lot of arguments with people about price gouging, which from the point of view of traditional economies, like medieval economies, price gouging, like if there were a hurricane and I got a whole bunch of bottled water and drove down to the side of the hurricane and I was selling water for $10 a gallon. Okay. Now the thing is, or like when they say, like when there's some kind of disaster and everybody's filling up their cars, the gas stations, there are laws keeping them from raising their prices above a certain point. But the thing is, if the gas stations were to make gas like $8 a gallon during an emergency, there would still be gas there. You notice how when the prices stay there, everybody goes and fills up their car. And, then if somebody doesn't have gas, they can't get it. Whereas, so that's where the Enlightenment is about a totally different take on morality, is that when it comes down to it, if I'm charging $8 a gallon during an emergency, well, at least people are coming in and they're taking what they need. And then if somebody else needs gas, it's going to be there for them, instead of everybody just basically going in there, taking as much gas as they can and getting out of there. And then there's not anything left for anybody else. So it's different viewpoints about how to manage scarcity. Okay, how are we going to manage scarcity? So with that, that's the best I can do. I can do there. All right. So as far as that goes, yeah, I would. Yeah, so Emily, I would definitely note that, I mean, Utopia is really best, like Thomas More's Utopia. I think definitely proto socialist is something that I think would be an appropriate label for that. That he's really, of course, we want to know that that's influenced by Plato's Republic. But yeah, like Thomas More is proposing, or was he seriously proposing this, or is he just kind of, here we go, let me just give you an ideal here that I know that we'll never reach? But what he's doing here is he's proposing a society that is based on the group, and he believes that by doing what's best by the group, for the group, that individuals are better off. Which, of course, influences socialist thinking. In fact, Frederick Bastiat, a 19th century classical liberal, I disagree with his assessment on this, but he blamed classical studies for socialism. And I think what he's doing is he's emphasizing this more Northern Renaissance approach, that, something that is more, this Northern Renaissance sort of thing that is more focused on the group, collectivist thinking. Whereas liberalism, when we think about the Enlightenment and individualism, then you do what's best for the individual, and society benefits from that. Okay, so that's really just, when you think about liberalism, classical liberalism versus socialism, then that is your then that's kind of the the cue there. Okay, as far as that comes up. Okay, so as far as we're going with that, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, but I think that that's something that but definitely more with Thomas More, just putting him in the context of the Northern Renaissance. Okay, so we've got that one, and let's see what's getting the most upvotes here. Okay, remember, if you're here in the Fiveable chat, you can upvote. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not in the Fiveable chat, definitely look for some more information on Fiveable. Okay, so what impact did goods from the New World have on European markets? Now, of course, you have more diversity of goods that are there. Now, there are a couple of things, there are a couple of layers to this, okay? Because first of all, before the age of exploration, these luxury goods were so expensive that nobody really had them, okay? And then Vasco da Gama goes to India and comes back with a ship full of these exotic goods. Well, he pays for his voyage many times over, but as people make those trips, the prices of those goods go down. But see, here's the other thing, that it leads to this, there's this era of prosperity in Europe where the population goes up and then more people want these goods. And so you have the price revolution where in the 17th century, prices actually go up. So it's like prices go down as an immediate result of the age of exploration, and people have access to these exotic goods. But as people start to become more prosperous, they're like, hey, I want like more of these exotic goods. And then the prices go back up, not up to where they were, because it's prices that actually middle class people can afford, unlike during the Middle Ages where some of these luxuries, like if I were to take out a jar of cinnamon, somebody'd be like, wow, that sort of thing. So as far as that goes, when we think about today, like frankincense, for example, like when the wise men brought Jesus frankincense, that was something that barely anybody had. But of course now, it's not like it's cheap, but you can buy, like my wife's into essential oils and that sort of thing, and frankincense is something that is affordable for middle class people today. So that's good questions there, good questions. So okay, so who were the new monarchs and what impact did they have on European politics and the state? The new monarchs, we want to imagine this as somewhere between, somewhere between like feudalism in the Middle Ages and absolutism. Okay, so the new monarchs is almost, it's kind of like the building blocks, almost a stepping stone to absolutism. Now, in England, you've got Henry VII, who was fighting the War of the Roses, and it wasn't there were several. Like we think about the English Civil War, there's only been one English Civil War since the War of the Roses that's been pretty stable. But before that, there had been several dynastic disputes. And so Henry VII starts to centralize administration. Okay, so that's one of the big things about the new monarchs, is they are centralizing the administration of, and the tax collecting, and basically bringing more money into the royal coffers directly and less dependence on the nobility. Now, of course, that, absolutism is going to ratchet that up. But if you think about it, like Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, they proclaimed that there was going to be a single religion, whereas in the Middle Ages you had Catholics, Jews, and Muslims. And then then Ferdinand and Isabella, they say, well, Spain is going to be a Catholic country. Okay, so Spain's going to be a Catholic country. And so as far as that is concerned, we see that they're standardizing religion. They're trying to create, kind of a nation, so to speak, when we think about it on those terms. Okay, so, as far as that goes, Ferdinand, Isabella, and then Henry VII. And you could also think about Henry VIII, when Henry VIII proclaims a national religion, that this is something that is, that is very much in line with the goals of these, of these folks that are doing that. So any specific, now you could go into France, but the thing about this exam is that I really haven't delved into France. And I don't, so the thing is, it's really this exam, the way that it's written, it is not so much like, it's not going to do like a gotcha kind of thing, that as long as students understand those two, there's not really like, they need to understand what the new monarchs were and what they represented, but it's not like, oh man, I knew Spain and England and they asked about France. Okay, but France, there was, also a trend toward new monarchies. But again, I need to look a little bit more into that. So which is why I tend to lean on England and Spain for the most part. Yeah, and you don't really have as strong of a monarchy in France as you do in England. Of course, that was also the case during the Hundred Years' War, that England really had only a fraction of the resources that France had, but England already had like much more of a of a centralized administration than France did, and England was much more homogenous than France was at the time. That's, of course, one of the big things in the French Revolution is this whole idea of, French regionalism and federalism kind of. I mean, France was really kind of a de facto federal state when you think about it, that way. And so, as far as that goes, we'll go ahead and go on to the next one. Okay, can I briefly explain? Okay, so Emily, as far as the Holy Roman Empire, which of course what Voltaire said was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Now, I saw a pretty decent meme that somebody was like, "Oh, I inherited an empire," and then they find out like they're excited, and then they find out like, "Oh, it was the Holy Roman Empire." And gosh, I wish I knew where that meme was. So as far as that goes, um, let's see. The Holy Roman Empire, now sometimes it's traced back to Charlemagne, when the Pope crowned Charlemagne Roman Emperor in 800, okay, 800 AD. But it really wasn't until the 10th century. It was around 960 that Otto was proclaimed Roman Emperor. And that's where the whole Holy Roman Empire started, okay? And so the Holy Roman Empire never really materialized into an empire the way we think about it today. That it really remained more of a confederation of all of these semi-sovereign principalities. Now, the Pope, throughout the Middle Ages, would crown the Holy Roman Emperor, which, of course, Napoleon sort of brings back. He has the Pope come to his coronation. And, of course, Napoleon also abolished the Holy Roman Empire. But the practice of the Pope, I was actually reading about this the other day and found it interesting. The practice of the Pope crowning the Holy Roman Emperor ended in the 16th century. Now, of course, we can put that with the Reformation. So when it came down to it, after the Protestant Reformation, a lot of the electors and princes of the Holy Roman Empire were Protestant. So the idea of the Pope crowning the Holy Roman Emperor, that wasn't really something that people were interested in. It didn't unite everyone. So Germany was really torn apart by the Reformation. And it's about, I was actually talking to my class about nationalism and Ficht. I don't know how to say his name. I'm not German. But he's talking about his address to the German nation, where he says that basically Germany has found itself, like various parts of Germany have found themselves aligned with France or with Sweden or with Austria. And Germany has never been able to become a nation. And so the Holy Roman Empire, its highest point would have been before the Reformation, certainly before the 30 Years' War. Okay, so 1648, the end of the so-called period one. This is the point where definitely the Holy Roman Empire sees no recovery, okay? That it drastically reduced the power of the Holy Roman Emperor. It took some territories out of the Holy Roman Empire, and it was never the same after that. And by the time Napoleon abolished it, it really wasn't anything of any real worth. Okay, and so what are the high points of the late Middle Ages that are necessary to understand the Renaissance? Now, what I would say here is understanding the Renaissance is just understanding that the late Middle Ages was pretty full of low points. Okay, so when it came down to it, the Renaissance historiography that we see there. So the Renaissance historiography is really like down on the Middle Ages. Okay, not a big fan of the Middle Ages when you look at this Renaissance historiography. And so it's focusing, and that's the thing, that the Middle Ages were not all bad, but they got bad. And so that's really, you think about, we remember the beginning and the end of everything. And so the Middle Ages began with the fall of the Roman Empire and with chaos, and ended with chaos with like the 30 Years' War and famine and all of this other stuff. And so as far as that goes, I would say that it's really not necessary to know anything good about the Middle Ages in order to understand in order to understand the Renaissance, because it was really kind of in a lot of cases, kind of an anti Middle Ages sort of mindset there. So as far as that's concerned, let's see, we're finished answering that one. And let's see. So, what Italian city states are the most vital to understand? I would say during the Middle Ages, like Genoa and Florence and that sort of thing. But as far as that goes, let's see. So, I would say Florence, of course, would have been the most important. Now, what's interesting about Florence is the power of Italy was largely maritime before the Renaissance, and Florence was not a port city. Okay, so Florence was not a port city, and that's something that during the Middle Ages, they were never that powerful. And then, they end up having the Medici Bank. And so Florence would be the most important one. And I would say that you probably don't necessarily need anything but Florence. I mean, of course, Rome is important as well. But as far as that goes, that's what I would say that Florence, and getting into other stuff is really kind of extraneous. I can't think of where somebody would need. Now, if they were studying the Middle Ages, I think that Venice would be very important. But, from there, I don't know where I would go from that. But I think Florence would be the most important, and I would focus on that as an illustrative example. What was the cause and effect of the War of the Spanish Succession? Okay, which, of course, one of the most popular moments in any of my videos is when I talk about Charles II of Spain and inbred level 5. I wish I had like a voice changer that I could do here. But inbred level 5. So Charles II of Spain died, and he left the throne to somebody from the Bourbon family, one of Louis XIV's relatives, which is what Louis XIV wanted. So the end result of the War of the Spanish Succession was that Louis was fighting this war to put a Bourbon monarch on the Spanish throne, because the Habsburgs, remember before that, you had the Austrian Habsburgs and the Spanish Habsburgs, here a Habsburg, there a Habsburg, everywhere a Habsburg. Okay, so they're all over the place. And then after the War of Spanish Succession, you have a Bourbon on the Spanish throne. Now, the thing is that Louis XIV was still thinking about things in terms of like dynastic wars. Okay, so when it comes down to it, the British were really the ones who were the most forward thinking, because the British were like, at the end of this, they're like, you know what, I'm okay with a Bourbon monarch. Now, remember that the French and Bourbon thrones, according to the Treaty of Utrecht, could not be combined, but the thing is, the British, they're more concerned about naval power. So they said, you know what, we'll take Gibraltar. So they've got this naval base in southern Spain near the Straits of Gibraltar, which of course is going to be something that's going to be helpful during the Napoleonic Wars. But the British were thinking more ahead, okay, because when you look forward from the War of the Spanish Succession, the wars become more imperial rather than dynastic. You've got this whole period where you've got the War of the Spanish Succession, the War of the Austrian Succession, the War of the Polish Succession. And so it's like, who's going to be the king of this country? Whereas Britain is already thinking like, we want to be a powerful nation. We want to be a naval power. So I would say with that, the settlement of course, Louis XIV's wars are over, and we won't hear from France again for at least a little while, about what you get about a 60, 70-year break from France. But the War of the Spanish Succession, I think that you're setting up, British naval power to a whole new level, which is very important. And so, as far as that goes, the political consequences of the English Glorious Revolution and the French Revolution. Now, that's a big one, Amber. But the Glorious Revolution, of course, it's really, when we compare these things, the Glorious Revolution really just changed the balance of power between institutions that already existed. Now, this brings you into this brings you into the, is this one of your students, Emily, that's asking this question? All right, so as far as that goes, that the Glorious Revolution changed the balance of power between between institutions that already existed. So, what you see going on during the Stuart dynasty is this conflict between the crown and parliament. Now, parliament had existed ever since the Middle Ages. Remember the Magna Carta, which is before 1450, but still worth noting that this principle of taxation by consent. And so, essentially, which I haven't fed, did Theresa May survive the no confidence vote? We were looking at that earlier today. Hmm. Okay. So it looks like she did survive the no confidence vote. I wish they would have gotten rid of her. That's just me. But okay, so 200 to 117. So about a third of her party voted against her. And she claims that she's not going to stand for election as the leader in 2022. I mean, the Brexit plan that she put forward, it's like, I mean, either she's grossly incompetent putting forward something that that her Democratic Unionist Party colleagues would not vote for, or she just doesn't want it to work. I mean, it's like if she were trying to sabotage it, she couldn't do any better than she's done. I mean, it's like, you think about if something's going to affect Northern Ireland and your government is propped up by the Democratic Unionist Party and it needs those votes, then you go talk to the Democratic Unionist Party before you negotiate a deal. I don't know. I mean, the ineptitude is just really getting to me. But anyway, so Parliament today, like today, the monarch is still, like, Theresa May is Her Majesty's Prime Minister. She leads Her Majesty's government, but Her Majesty doesn't interfere in the government at all. If any of y'all watched The Crown, I'm guessing, Emily, you probably watched The Crown. I've watched the first season. I still need to watch the second season. But oh yes, okay. So the thing is that the British monarch, even though they're technically the head of state and the government is their government, it is still that British monarch does not interfere in Parliament. So Parliament is the authority there. Okay, Parliament is the authority there. Now, beforehand, it was really the royal family. Okay, it was really the crown that called most of the shots, and the crown only called Parliament when it needed to. Okay, so as far as that goes, the crown only called Parliament when it needed to, when it needed money, or like Henry VIII, when he pulled out from the Catholic Church. Then Henry VIII is Henry VIII says, like, well, I need to call Parliament because I want to get a rubber stamp. Okay, so Henry VIII wants to get a rubber stamp on the on this, and he calls Parliament. But there weren't regular meetings of Parliament. You didn't have, like, okay, every 5 years there's an election. So 2022 there was an election in 2017, which didn't go so well for Theresa May. She thought it would, but it didn't. And so, as far as that goes, there's an election every 5 years, okay, which Parliament can call an early election. So she called an early election, but there has to be an election of Parliament every 5 years. Parliament meets frequently on its own terms. Now, of course, they still go through they still kind of go through the motions, here, that technically, when Parliament's going to be dissolved before an election, the Prime Minister goes to Buckingham Palace and gets the Queen to formally dissolve Parliament. Now, so before the stewards, you have parliament as they meet whenever the monarch says, and then they go home and they do something, whether the monarch needs money or whatever. So it's between 1603 and 1688 where you've got the stewards, where who's in charge here, okay? And you've got this tension between the crown and parliament. And so the Glorious Revolution settles this in favor of the parliament. And so the monarch still is technically the divine right monarch, but that's not how the government functions. Now, the difference between that and the French Revolution is the French Revolution basically introduces new institutions. Like the French had an absolute monarchy, and then they start to thank you, Ski Tube, for the kind words there. Thank y'all for those of you who are watching on YouTube. And remember, this is a Fiveable sponsored broadcast. So if you want more information about becoming a Fiveable member, go to fiveable.me/sign up. And then to sign up for next week's Kahoot games, anybody can play, whether you're a member of Fiveable or not. Fiveable.me/Kahoot. All of that stuff is in the description. Okay. So as far as that goes, remember tonight's questions are being taken from Fiveable members. So the French Revolution, it's like, well, let's start a national assembly. And then Edmund Burke is watching from Britain, and he's like, this isn't going to go too well, because the French are not just reorganizing and updating their institutions, they're undermining institutions and creating new ones. And sure enough, the French Revolution spun out of control. Now, the two biggest legacies of the French Revolution, I would say, are liberalism and nationalism. Okay. And so when you think about, like, one of the questions that gets asked sometimes is about the relationship of Napoleon to the French Revolution. But the French Revolution was about more than creating a representative body. That the French Revolution was also about creating a French nation. So when we think about the National Assembly and you look at the Declaration of the Rights of Man, that sovereignty resides in the nation. And so Napoleon, when you look at the Napoleonic Code, which was the first code of laws that applied to all of France, that Napoleon was accomplishing the goal of creating a French nation. And also there were other things about Napoleon that also, although it wasn't a constitutional government, it wasn't a limited government that he was running, it was a dictatorship. It was one of those, a lot of times when we think about dictators, we think about Stalin and Hitler, but Napoleon is one of those, like, really, sometimes people refer to Napoleon as an enlightened absolutist. And certainly when you look at the Concordat, where Napoleon says that, we're bringing back the Catholic Church, but not as the state religion, as the majority religion. Okay, so France is still, there was religious freedom, and, Napoleon's bringing that about. So France, after the French Revolution, France is never going to be able to run, at least after the fall of Napoleon, it's not going to be a divine right absolute monarchy anymore. That even with the Bourbon Restoration, there was a representative body. So it was a constitutional monarchy. So that's one of the things there that absolute monarchy has done. And that's something that, if you want to compare and show that they both did something, that absolute monarchy is no longer a thing in either of those places after either of those revolutions. And of course, when you look at the sum total, like, they all have their crazy parts. Okay, so you could do a lot of comparisons between Cromwell's protectorate and the Reign of Terror. Okay, so as far as that goes, thank you, Amber, for that question. Now, we've still got some time, and I've only got one question. Okay. Yeah. Now, Emily, I would say I never really, anytime I mention the Ottoman Empire, it's really as an accessory. Like, I never give a lecture that focuses on the Ottoman Empire itself. Now, when we talk about the rise of Russia, we've got to bring in, okay, here's the Ottoman Empire, and here's how that plays into that. Today, I was talking about Greek independence, and that's the Ottoman Empire plays into that. Now, I don't think the Ottoman Empire is outside of the scope, especially since they're really trying to globalize the course. And the Ottoman Empire had a substantial foothold in Europe, in the Balkans, during its heyday. But I've never run into a situation where like a student would need to know the Ottoman Empire in like the internal workings of the Ottoman Empire in order to do well in the exam. But if we think about like an LEQ, an SAQ, a DBQ, and I don't know if we'd ever see a DBQ on the Ottoman Empire, but you could use those things. Like the Ottoman Empire could be used as an illustrative example, but I'm not necessarily seeing it um, in the concept outline. Okay, so as far as that goes, so with that, yeah, I would say that it's really up to you how much you want to emphasize the Ottoman Empire. All right, so with that, and we see here, what do you need to know about the witchcraft craze, okay, following the Reformation? Okay, so with that, what do we need to know? The witchcraft craze, one of the things is knowing that uh, so that is really most of the people are women, not all. Uh, but the thing is that I bring in is the witch craze starts to subside with the scientific revolution, because the uh, as far as that goes, with the scientific revolution, people stop like the elites at least, stop believing in witches. Now, that's not to say that there weren't some very smart people that believed in witches. I'm pretty sure that Newton believed in witches, but at the same time, I think that the witch craze. It's not something that I'm super like. It's not. I don't have a video on the witch craze. I need to sometime. It's something I need to delve into a little bit more, but it's not a topic that I've ever really delved into. And I've been teaching this for a decade, and that's the thing. For people who are, have recently started teaching AP Euro, you never really get to the point, or at least I haven't, where I know everything. Okay, so that's something to remember. You don't have to know everything to do well in this exam, or even to teach this course. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we are we are out of questions. I'm going to hang around just a little bit. Now, remember, ladies and gentlemen, to take a look if you're watching on YouTube. Fiveable does broadcast every week for, some of those for members, others that people can watch, and that sort of thing. So make sure that if you want to participate in these, and these are small group chats. Like when it comes down to it, when somebody subscribes to Fiveable, they're getting like access to small group stuff, and that your question's going to be answered. And there is a weekly broadcast for members. So it's something that's definitely a good investment, and they're going to be broadcast right before the exam as well. So keep that in mind. And also remember that there are going to be Kahoot games next week, and it's going to be awesome. You want to go ahead and sign up for that. Go ahead and reserve your spot, because space is limited for those. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all very much for joining us tonight, and good luck, everybody, on your semester exams. And it is always a pleasure.